Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Bulldog Blast Podcast. This broadcast is written and produced by 7th and 8th graders at Heuvelton Central School. I'm your host, Mrs. Madlin. In our first segment today, Asa and Maya will continue their interview with local historian Mrs. Linda Wood.
I'm Maya.
And I'm Asa.
And today we are here with Mrs. Woods. She's a historian of Heuvelton.
In the town of Oswegatchie. Yeah.
Okay.
When was the Hillcrest Cemetery founded?
The land for that cemetery down Rinsler Street was purchased in 1868, and the Hillcrest Cemetery Association was formed, and they started burying people over there, but also they took them from the previous area, which was, I don't know if you kids know this, but underneath the water tower where the playground was. That was the first cemetery. So when they designated the Hillcrest as the town cemetery, they told people to dig up their relatives and bury them over there, but word has it that they weren't all dug up.
Wow.
And before that, when it was way back in the early years of settling here, people buried their loved ones in their backyard. So there's also on York Street, where the Wesleyan Church is, that has some people buried there. They're not sure where on the plot, but it's someplace there. In the building, one of the oldest buildings also was in 1829, Van Heuvel built the Episcopal Church, which is now the Catholic diocese. So that's also one of the oldest ones.
What would you say that Heuvelton was most known for?
It depends which generation you ask. Back in the day, they had turkey days, which all the farmers would bring their turkeys into the village and sell them to the highest bidders. And that went on from the 1890s to the 1920s. And the only way that was possible for them to do that was with the help with the railroad to bring those piles of turkeys down to New York State.
Wow, thanks Asa, Maya, and Mrs. Wood. I'll never look at that water tower the same again. In our next segment, Israel and Michael will discuss whether girls should play football.
You're listening to the Bulldog Blast Podcast. I'm Israel, and I'm joined today by Michael. Today we will talk about the debate, should girls play football? About 25,000 girls play football, and they play in all different positions. I don't think it's the best idea for girls to play football because of all the injuries they can get. Michael?
I think girls should be allowed to play football. I mean, it's unreasonable to say girls can't play. If boys can do cheerleading, why can't girls play football?
Yeah, but girls aren't biologically built or aggressive enough for football. What do you think?
That's no fair. Everyone knows that playing a sport isn't about your size. It's about your determination.
I guess, but girls have their sports like cheerleading and boys have their sports like football.
That just brings me back to the boys doing cheerleading.
I know. I guess the point is that girls should be allowed to play with other girls and boys should be allowed to play with other boys. Because some serious injuries can occur like sprains, fractures, concussions, and ACL tears.
That's a very good point, and that agreement means no one will get hurt more than usual.
I guess we all know who won this debate. Me! Thanks for listening to the Bulldog Blast Podcast. Stay tuned for our next exciting episode.
Thanks, Israel and Michael. In our final segment today, Nick, Tristan, and Lainey will interview Mrs. Sharon Murdock, Town of DePoyster historian.
You're listening to the Bulldog Blast Podcast. I'm Nick, and I'm joined today by Tristan and Laney. Today we'll talk about an overview of history of agriculture in St. Lawrence County. Agriculture is a science or practice of farming, including cultivation of soil for the growing of crops and the rearing of animals to provide food, wool, and other products. But always it has been present in this region since the Native Americans cultivated plants here, and has changed over the time as the type of settlers and settlements have changed. Agriculture has made it possible for Native Americans and settlers to survive in this era.
Native Americans learned from Europeans about farming. There has been many eras over the thousands of years, such as the cheese factory era, the acid era, and many more. Right now, let's talk about the milk marketing era. Beginning in the 1930s, milk prices declined. The prices bottomed out in 1933 because the Western and Central New York milk producers.
Down the road in a different era, there was a line of willow trees in the town of DePoyster that stood for beauty. Today we have here our school secretary, Miss Murdock. She is the historian of the village DePoyster. Her grandfather was the man who planted those willow trees back in the 1900s.
How did you become DePoyster historian?
Well, one day the superintendent of DePoyster, the town of DePoyster, came to me and said that the lady that was the historian of DePoyster was not going to do it anymore, and he wanted to know if I'd be interested. So I said, give me a few days, I got to think about this. And I told them, yes, I would.
What inspired you to be the historian of DePoyster?
Actually, I lived there my whole life. My family's lived there their whole lives. My great-grandparents, my grandparents, so that's why I've got an interest in the history of DePoyster.
How long have you been the historian?
About 14 years. I started in 2004.
When did your grandfather plant those trees?
About 1905, which is like 113 years ago. And I don't know, I think Laney, did I show you, Laney? I got a picture of those trees.
Oh, yeah.
Did I show you that, Laney?
Yeah.
That's back when my grandfather had cows. These trees right here, they used them as fence posts. Yeah. That's what they did. They planted them so they'd be fence posts. And that's his cows. So
That's a good idea.
This picture is probably 100 years old, or 113, and this is my grandpa. That's the man who planted them.
Hey, oh.
Doesn't look like a farmer, does he? But he was. He was. And a house, Nicholas, right next to the church.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, that's where he lived. My mother lived there. I lived there. Now my daughter lives there. Michelle.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick, Tristan, and Laney. Stay tuned for part 2 of their interview with Mrs. Murdock next week. This concludes episode 4 of the Bulldog Blast Podcast. We hope you'll tune in for our next episode.